Hello, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. I'm joining you. My name is Max Orr. I'm joining you from lovely Peel Gallery here in Carrboro, and it is just a beautiful North Carolina day, and I am so thankful that you're joining us today before you head out into the wilderness for some wonderful words and poetry. Before we begin, I want to thank a few people. Of course, I do want to start by thanking Peel Gallery. This is a wonderful exhibit called Local Produce here at Peel Gallery, and it's going from May 14th to June 27th. Wonderful artists, Charles Chase, Kimberly English, Jimmy Fountain, Genghis Mahir Mosavi, Sheiko Morasugi, and Louis Watts. Wonderful artists and great work here, and we just are so thankful for Lindsay Mativier for inviting us into this space. Everyone should come down, get familiar with this. It's going to be a great cultural spot for all of North Carolina. Peel Gallery. So thank you, Peel. I also want to thank our sponsors, the Cotton Market Group at Morgan Stanley and Carolina Meadows, a retirement community here at Chapel Hill, for their wonderful support of our programs, especially our K-12 programs. And of course, I want to thank the North Caroliniana Society and the General Alumni Association for all their help in sponsoring and putting on our programs. For those who don't know who we are or what we do, Carolina Public Humanities, we have the banner right behind us here. It's our job. We are the dedicated public outreach arm for the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And it's our job to make sure that the great scholarship that's at Chapel Hill gets out into the community. And it's also our job to inculcate humanistic reflection and dialogue wherever we can in North Carolina's many communities. And that's what we're doing here today. It has been an incredible year. The idea of the humanities is to inspire people to think about ideas and to reflect and to get into situations where we can talk with others about important ideas and beliefs and values that make our community a vibrant community. And I just can't stress enough how important it is that we engage in these activities. Carolina Public Humanities does that in 3 ways. We do that, of course, with public programs, and today being a very special event outside of our normal public programming of weekend seminars and lectures, great books, reading groups, language lunches, and whatnot. So those are our public programs, ways that we encourage this dialogue and reflection. We also have a very extensive K through 12 teaching program called Carolina K-12. We have bring our poets to these events as well, in which we are making sure that our teachers in our state, who are so absolutely under siege right now, especially in the realm of ideas, that they have the access to important scholarship and are given the tools to have the courage to really embrace these ideas in the classroom. History is hard stuff, and we can't be absolutely, well, to excuse the expression, whitewashing it. This has been a year of millions of voices calling out for justice, millions of voices expressing their pain, millions of voices sometimes celebrating triumphs. It's so great to be here. The 4 of us, look at us, unmasked. That's something to celebrate. But there's been a lot more pain than there has been celebration. And listen, it's a crisis. There are millions of voices calling out, but not everyone is listening. We have just recently had our situation here at the University of North Carolina where voices are being silenced. And so it's very important that we listen with even closer with even better ears to what is being said out there. And there are special voices we should be listening to. And those special voices are the voices of our poets. And we have brought together 3 wonderful poets to help us engage with, in particular, the special challenges of 400 years that the African-American Black community has faced, and how poetry is a very particular way of making sure that those voices are heard. Let me introduce our poets to us, and enough of me talking. I want to hear these words. Crystal Simone Smith is here with us. Hello. You go. Round of applause. Yes, you can hear this virtual applause out there. Poet, author of the collections Roots Home and Running Music, Wildflowers, which is haiku, senryu, and haibun. Crystal Simone Smith is an alumna of Kalalu Writers Workshop, as well as the Yale Writers Workshop, and is also a Duke University Unbounded Fellow this year and for the next 2 years, a wonderful program at Duke University. A teacher, writer, activist. Wonderful. Thank you for joining us, Crystal. We also have CJ Suitt here. CJ Suitt is a poet, artist, performer, teacher, and community organizer. We'll be talking about poetry and place, and a very important idea. As the first poet of a very important place, Chapel Hill. I know we're in Carrboro, we're in foreign territory, but Chapel Hill is just about 100 yards down the road there. CJ Suitt has co-directed, starred in historical reenactment of the 1947 Freedom Riders. He works with youth at the Durham Youth Home as well as with inmates at the Orange County Correctional Facility, and has put his voice to the public good, and we're really absolutely honored to have you here. Thank you for joining us, CJ. And finally, we have Tyree Daye, who's a teaching assistant. Yes, round of applause. Tyree Daye is a teaching assistant professor of English, author of the collections River Hymns, which won the APR Honickman Prize, as well as a recent offering Cardinal, beautiful poems. He was a Cave Canem Fellow and the 2019 Palm Beach Poetry Festival Langston Hughes Fellow. He's also been a writer at residence at the UC Santa Barbara. Three amazing voices. I'm going to explain what we're going to do here today. We have two sessions. We want to invite you into this because I mentioned Carolina Public Humanities is all about dialogue, so we want to invite you into this conversation. So feel free to use the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen there, and I'll be off screen asking questions. We're going to start our first session today looking at poetry as personal expression and how poetry is embedded in community, place, and history. And in our second session, we will move more towards poetry as power, and looking how we can use poetry to enact social change, or at least to enlighten us as to the conditions that we're living in. Enough of me talking. We're here to listen to poetry. What I've done is, through a random selection of ordering, we're going to have our three poets just start out with a cold recital or reading of one of their poems, and we start with CJ Suitt. Take it away. Thank you.
So excited to be here. As the first poet laureate of Chapel Hill, and standing on the shoulders of so many literary legends who have came through this space and this area. It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. A beautiful day, what a beauty. Could you be mine? Would you be mine? Won't you be my neighbor? Hello, neighbor. I grew up in a city where progress and distress go hand in hand like glove and mitt. Grew up watching egos trip on sidewalks full of wallets and money clips, a sinking ship, whose captain reassures everyone to secure their belts and stay strapped in. The director yells action, and we play like we don't see the props. In the form of expensive shops and parking lots, human rights on the chopping block bothers us a lot, just not enough to tell them stop. They bulldoze blocks and hide their hands. Seemingly spontaneous construction, the way they roll these rocks and divide the land so fast it seems they sold the clocks and hid the sands. And on days like this, here I am, in a wonderful little college town where true feelings are glossed over with PC wax, like the floors in hospitals. When I say PC, I mean politically correct. When I live in a wonderful little college town where true feelings are glossed over with PC wax, like the floors in hospitals, and the impossibles are made to seem possible. Between the hellos and how you doings, I feel the hatred brewing as she clutches her purse a little tighter, telling herself, I'm no racist, I have black guy friends. It's just the ones I don't know I'm scared of, as if black men were pit bulls without leashes. The plight of a black man in a white town where he's only good if he's affluent or submissive, speaks proper English, and his clothes fit. Proper black man working a job with a dress code, no tattoos, well-groomed, is a student and or has a degree of some sort in this lovely little college town, where armchair progressives are a dime a dozen and social consciousness is a verbal state of mind that really only lies in revolutionary cotton tees, dreads, and blowing trees. Che is great, we love and try our best to emulate Bob Marley and Gandhi. Chapel Hill, where the predominantly black and Latinx parts of the city have been reduced to a quarter of the size they used to be, and or moved far away as not to tarnish the image of the university. A university that had erected a 20-foot tall monument representing a Confederate soldier in the Civil War, and less than 100 yards away was a monument to the builders of the university. That's a table that has these 2-foot-high slaves holding it up. The last time I walked past is a lovely white family enjoying lunch. I say what reverence we show, still making them be the foundation for the nourishment of this nation. Still no bill for reparations. And me in this hospital, I'm a struggling doctor. I need patience because it seems like this hospital's really an asylum, where the upper conscious class thinks they're the victims of a lower class society, and the rich lend hands to their rich artistic friends and stand over the impoverished, scratching at the insides of coffins with the lumber that built this town under their fingernails. Chapel Thrill, where students swarm in to swap the culture they were raised on in exchange for frats and sorors, kimchi for keg stands, tamales for top of the hill, curry for curriculum, and until recently in March, until Eve Carson's murder in March, basketball games and rivalries have been more important than murder rates. It's madness. I live in a wonderful little college town where true feelings are glossed over with PC wax like the floors in asylums. Welcome to the neighborhood. Thank you.
That is hard to follow. Okay, I am going to read a poem from my newest collection, Down to Earth. And a lot of these poems are about faith, my relationship with faith. This particular poem is about a community program that I experienced when I was young in school in the inner city. I think our host, Dr. Ore, talked about the state of funding in schools and teachers here in North Carolina. And when I was in Washington, D.C. growing up, we had a lot of community programs and pretty decent funding. So this southern thing of not defunding schools is kind of new to me. But I'm going to read that poem. Woodland Junior Church. No one ever spoke of need. Like God, it was a silent presence. The smear of potted meat to bread. The trace of mother's toilette that lingered when she left for work. What met it was random. A young white pastor with a blue church bus. For 6 summer weeks, he rounded the congregation of us up. Smart aleck girls in our armor of plastic glitter shoes and faded Marvel t-shirts. Pubescent boys with enough natural anger to strike him dead in the world if they chose. All of us singing the road song, forever let us hold our Bibles high, high, high. In the sanctuary of a high school auditorium, his fellow brothering flung batches of candy airborne for us to catch as tangible blessings. On longer communion days, the bonus of drumstick cones. Our expired mothers waiting as they were on their white savior, his faded portrait hung over the silence of the kitchen table.
I just wanted to say, I wouldn't be up here, and you all wouldn't know any of my poems if it wasn't for Crystal Simone Smith, who first published my chapbook, Sea Island Blues from Backbone Press. So thank you. This feels like kind of like a circle here. So it's nice to be here with you. By land. I've lived on dirt roads that bent and ended at a gate of ponds. The dust skipped up, didn't make my mother look like a dream I've lived on roads that drag through America. I've paced only them to the next town. The road we kissed on is gone, rich folks buying up the city in which we make do. I miss when Sonny could do a wheelie all the way down Person Street and no one would call the police because he was a part of the neighborhood, like the honeysuckle bush between 2 yards, and he was beautiful, not like a horse standing alone in a yellow field, but like a man is beautiful. Most of the little towns have a road nicknamed Devil's Turn, where someone's brother died on a Saturday night while Nina sang Tell Me More, and then some on the caddy's radio, the moon the color of the oldest cardinal. Every road isn't a way out. Some circle back like wolves. You can't get lost on them and they won't lose you. Others wait for you to run out of gas, then come alive with what your mother said would take you. Every road promises something like a father does, but when you arrive, the town is empty, and you wait like a child questioning everything. The road itself, laughing like a drunk man falling into a roadside ditch. The road I'm walking now is howling and full of moon. Hopefully, it will lead to myself. Hopefully, they'll take me home. I was thinking about the introduction and this phrase, and I think about this phrase a lot in poetry. This idea of celebration and pain. It makes me think about joy, actually, celebration and pain. I was listening to this conversation with two separate conversations, but I think it was Jericho Brown was talking about joy and Ross Gay was talking about joy. And I think they were both really saying the same thing, but it seems like in our art, right? And I hear this in all our poems, this idea of celebration and pain. I just wanted to make that comment. I have no question.
Yeah. Or, just triumph and beating, and absolutely. Because there's enough pain to go around, but, we have to triumph and get through it.
Those were three such powerful expressions. Could I just ask where those came from? Like what was it one particular, what inspires a poem? Is it one thing? Is it many things? Where does it come from?
I'd love to hear about CJ's poem.
Oh, yeah.
And especially that you did it just right without being memorized. Great.
Yeah, that poem has lived with me for a while, and it's taken many different forms. Most of it is still the same, but the sort of biggest chunk of it I wrote some years back and have continued to perform it and share it, and that to me is because things haven't changed, and I wrote that as a very frustrated early 20-something that of being from this place but not seeing myself or my story represented in its visitor brochure and its visitor center. When people think about this place, not thinking about my life where I grew up here outside the rural buffer, which in a small town is not that far from downtown, but didn't get a city newspaper for free, didn't have trash pickup, didn't have what I found out when I got older was that I also couldn't vote on certain offices and things in the city, even though I had a Chapel Hill address. And my mom comes from a more rural part of the state, and her relatives thought that we were wealthy because we lived in Chapel Hill. And we didn't have running water for a lot of my really early years in Chapel Hill. Didn't have hot water for a lot of that time, and was eating chuck wagons pretty regularly in Chapel Hill. And so I didn't see my story or the story of my relatives who still cut trees and dig ditches here and all that reflected in the story that other people told about this place and that I also saw told in this place. It was all Carolina blue, everything. And then also there was a major disconnect from the local history. We have a very rich civil rights history in this area. 1947 Freedom Rides came right through here. Bayard Rustin arrested right through here. Sentenced to time on the chain gang that led to an article written that dismantled the chain gang in North Carolina, right here in Chapel Hill. And so I didn't learn any of that in school, though. I had to go get that myself. And so I think that piece came a lot from feeling that frustration and feeling caught in between, and really wanted to share what my experience of this place was. And the sun doesn't come out in that poem. It's if you want to see the sunny, beautiful things, go to the visitor center, right? Go to a basketball game, right? But we also need to be challenging and sharing the story of this other side of what it means to be particularly a Black American growing up in this place,
How about for you two? What is the origin of a poem like the one you just read to us? Where does that come? What is the first spark?
Why don't you go? I'll go last.
I do Crystal. For this particular poem, I feel like it came about early in the manuscript. I wrote much of this book outside of North Carolina and Massachusetts, so in a very new place for me, the Northeast. And so I was missing home a lot, and I was also thinking about what am I missing? Again, maybe kind of turning back to this conversation of celebration of pain. And I think about that for home for me, right? I'm from Youngsville, North Carolina, a little town, not too far from here. And so I was thinking about what am I missing, and this idea of roads, right? This idea of traveling kept happening, and I wanted this repetition of roads. And I feel like for being Black anywhere in the world, but I'm talking about my particular situation, being Black in the world, there's roads that I'm walking, I'm like, oh, I'm enjoying life, but also roads that I get on, I know, right, this instinct, I feel like being Black in America for a while, you get this instinct that you build up where you like, no, like, oh shit, this road right here. It's Saturday, I'm cussing, so. But yeah. And so really this repetition of roads, right, kept happening. That's really how this poem started.
I'm generally a poet of memory, right? And so I became a poet when both of my parents died within a year of each other. One died instantly in a car accident. My mother, who was a single mother as I was growing up in poverty in the inner city. And so I write a lot about that experience. I like to tell people I climbed my way out of inner city poverty hand over hand, right? Because that's not necessarily my experience now. I live in a nice neighborhood right outside of Chapel Hill in Durham. And I don't struggle like I struggled when I was growing up, but still doesn't take away those memories, right? And so, the experience that I see my children have in the public school system in North Carolina and the South is quite different than the one that I experienced. And it's so strange because that was the inner city and we were impoverished, but it was almost a better experience than what is happening in North Carolina because they're so sort of hell-bent, I'm going to cuss too, hell-bent on defunding the schools. And so I think a lot about that. So it's all just a combination of past, present, future, all of that.
So I think we all kind of think about memory. When I think about memory, for me, I know I'm like looking for something in those memories that I know I don't know what I'm looking for, but I know I'm looking for something. What is it? And I'm putting this on you, CJ, but that poem seems to have memory in it. Is how do you all think about memory in y'all poems?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like, I love the sort of etymological performance art sort of breakdown of the word remember, that like it really is about like piecing ourselves back together. And I think for me, poetry is a process of doing that in a very clear way. It does feel like finding the pieces that have went away, as using language as a technology for that. And then also just really, I think it feels important to document. And then also for me, I'm also an artivist, and it feels really important. Poetry feels like, to me, an act of protest in every single poem. Or what my friend, contemporary dancer Mugisha Frank says is that protest is just to name a thing. And it feels like an act of like naming it, so then I can deal with it, right? And then I can really move through it rather than walking through this world of Chapel Hill in particular and being like, what is going on here? I feel like I'm getting treated differently or looked at differently when I walk into this place, or I feel out of place. Like, what is happening? And poetry really for me is a process of like remembering who I am and remembering who I am in a particular space. And also like along the way, sometimes things are more present, right? So then I write as I feel in Oakland, in San Francisco, in, wherever else I am. And that helps me like be like, okay, this is how I felt in this moment. So in the future, when I return to that place, there is a memory, there is a concrete thing I can return to. And I think, yeah, that's what comes. Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Thank you so much for these wonderful reflections. I think we should hear some more poems. So perhaps we just go, why don't we go in the reverse order, and we'll start with Tyree and just go back through the reverse order.
Okay, we all kind of mentioned work. I feel like work is maybe a part of our writing. So in this, I feel like I write about work a lot in this book. So I'm going to read this poem. I wanted to place an ocean. I tell my uncle's ghosts, don't waste your time hunting white folks who owe you money. I try to give him my body, but he won't take it. and pulls his wagon on. I began near fields where we laughed and fried fish. If somewhere were to sing, it would grow through each ghost and be heard as geese crossing overhead. The dead know the work they have done, and if they are not careful, their hands will stay in the shape of that work. My hands haven't touched cotton or tobacco. I haven't pulled small green worms or carried them inside with me, hidden in the body's doublings. I was only a child in harvested fields. When my people let the cotton sleep, there were no vacations. The fields of Roseville belonged to my kinfolk, dead and alive. And I don't know if my great-grandparents ever saw the ocean or fell asleep on the beach.
I am going to read another poem about community. This is the community that I live in here in Durham. As CJ sort of wonderfully elaborated on, even when I lived in Chapel Hill, when I first moved to the area, I lived in Chapel Hill, and my husband and I were one of the very few Black people in Chapel Hill when we went out, when we were hanging out. And so I did feel that sort of isolation and the feeling that you're being treated differently, which I thought was extremely strange because everybody here was supposed to be so-called liberal. So it was an interesting situation. But this is called A Southern Evening. Among the coated unison of fireflies, you trot downhill, heaving breaths in July's liquid air. The crack overhead isn't thunder. You wonder, then lift your eyes to the dead second a branch breaks, falls 20 feet. You are struck. Now horizontal, you mumble to a not phased closing day sky. These house lights won't come up in unison. The Corvette lover won't rush out to dig you out of tree debris, you tell your bitter self, nor tote a medical bag to the walkway of his tulip-rimmed golf course property. Why were you running beneath my dead oak, he'll ask. Aren't there live surviving oaks on your street? You lie in the quiet of fireflies and dusk.
When the gentrifiers come, there will be no trumpet sound. No cavalry, only the sound of bikes and electric cars. Yes, electric cars. 1,000 yoga mats will unfold without the presence of an indigenous yogi. When the gentrifiers come, there will not be affordable housing. There will be a surge in dog walkers, dogs, pet stores, cat cafes, affordable grocery stores will disappear, brown people will disappear, culture will disappear, then reappear as a microbrewery, lofted apartments, handmade gift shops, vape shops, co-working space. All CBD standalone stores will be owned by white people. They will decriminalize marijuana, and my cousins will still be struggling to make bail. The white girls will take twerk classes. Black men will watch like it's new shit. When the gentrifiers come, they will think it's a party for everyone, not an altar or a safe space. They will take selfies with and without the black people. They will think black is aesthetic, punk, a choice, think they invented karaoke and kombucha and farmers markets and farm to table. White people say nigga in the rap songs, just not around their black friends, except if it's karaoke night. They will throw parties and axes and shade and shame, the type that doesn't do much for eviction notices and eminent domain. Lofted apartments will billow with the smoke of Palo Santo and sage, and the air will not feel any clearer when the gentrifiers burn sage. A brown baby cries across sea, an ocean of tears. Another millionaire denies reparations. A black girl loses an earring. A pearl drops down a storm drain. When the gentrifiers burn sage, a museum in Brazil catches fire, and we can't figure the why. There's a constant forgetting, a feeling that it can all be smudged away. You that hurt. When the gentrifiers burn sage, there is a smirk at a lynching, a deadpan stare at the scene of police violence. A car passes a person on the side of the road. A car is stopped because of a tail light. A penny is dropped into a bum's cup. A houseless person is called a bum in passing by a student with a housing scholarship. There is a white riot disguised as celebration. 1,000 brogues do keg stands. When the gentrifiers burn sage, a library burns in Harlem. A white dog is born, not the terrier kind, the kind that guards Bel Air mansions and homesteads when gentrifiers burn sage, the air gets thin, my breath gets short. So does my patience. I forget where I am, not who, but where. There is an erasure, takes the oxygen from the room. 1,000 yoga mats unfold, and the oxygen is replaced with baby goats and hops. Yes, hops. And I'm trying to remember where I am. There is a forgetting, yes, a forgetting of source and place and history and herstory. There is a restoring, a testifying to an experience not lived.
So like you're the poet laureate of Chapel Hill now. You have all this experience. I'm trying to how are you dealing with like having this experience, but also, also being inside this system. That, I feel like
Yeah. I mean, it feels like, in some ways it feels like a long time coming. In some ways it feels like just a title. In some ways it feels like a really, an honor, and not a lot because of the people who are in power here, but because we do have this very rich literary history here. George Moses Horton, first Black published poet in the South, bought his time to come here to campus and read poems, right? Pauli Murray does the first Eucharist in this city. Zora Neale Hurston teaches here, which is discussive, did that happen? Did that not happen? But we know it happened, right? Folks, we have a long lineage of writers and literary folks here. And so for me, there's a sort of heaviness that exists in it of okay, we have not acknowledged this. I feel like we should have had a poet laureate already in a town that has this rich of a literary history. And it feels like, given the pandemic and the past year, I was December of 2019, I was made poet laureate and we were in lockdown in March. And so I had lots of plans that I haven't been able to sort of enact yet. And they just extended my laureateship a year. And so that feels helpful. But I feel in many ways, I've always been this poet. I've always been a poet who is called in this place that I'm from and said that I love you and we got to do better. And so it doesn't necessarily feel much different than what I have done before. It feels just all right, let's speak to, now that I have this platform, let's continue to speak to the ways in which I want to see my community change. Let's not switch up and become mainstream. Let's not sugarcoat what actually exists here. And so I feel a certain new sort of weight of my community that I feel a need to represent and speak to and show up for. And I also what is true of art and what is true of ancestry and what has called me to this point is that it's keep your shoulder to the wheel. Don't overdo it. Just continue to be an artist and continue to create and speak from the heart and speak from your experience and experience of other people who don't have the platform you do. And so, yeah, I mean, that's a little bit of how it feels. There are up days and there are down days. There are days where it feels more heavy or more light. And some days it just feels like a title. A poet laureate is not a thing that comes with $100,000 salary.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, far from it. And so, yeah, dealing with what it means to have a title that doesn't necessarily speak to all that you feel like you're carrying is another whole, yeah.
You bring up this really interesting point. It's something we had discussed in planning, is the relationship between, the personal and the community and the responsibility. Now, you are in an official capacity as a poet laureate. Do you feel a responsibility when you write a personal poem that you're also speaking for other people, or what is the relationship between community and person when you write poems, Crystal and Tyree?
For me, I can speak from so many different roles, the single mother, because I had a single mother. I'm the Black mother who is constantly worried about her son going out or sons going out into, the street and being violated or killed even. And so I can speak from many different places, and I know that is going to resonate with people. Absolutely, right? So yeah, I think so. And I also think even when I'm writing personal poems, I like to, when I go into the community, what I do, CJ is the poet laureate, and I think that's absolutely wonderful. Like like you said, they don't get their just due, and they don't get paid well. I do volunteer, and I go into places where I know that or at least I feel like I can make a difference. I go into places like the Durham Youth Home, who are holding children who are minors, awaiting trial, because they're not old enough to go into prison or jail, the city jail. And I also go to places called Rebound, which is a program that is put in place for kids who are expelled from school. So they can go somewhere during the day and still get schoolwork and coursework done, but also they bring in volunteers, and that's where I come in. I come in, we read poetry, we write poetry together. I call the program, which I run through my small press that I run, Backbone Press, I call it Writing Your Wrong, right? So yeah, you may have done X and X, whatever, but we understand how the system works. We understand that it's over-policed, that you're over-penalized for what you're doing, that you're targeted in many cases, right? So it's important to right your wrong, but it's also important to, write this, talk about it, use the frustration that you have, let that come out in words as opposed to in negative actions, right? And so I feel like going into the community is something that, because of the way that I grew up and having been able to come out of that relatively, safely, untouched, is really important. So that's why I do that.
When I'm writing, I there's definitely poets in the room with me and ancestors in the room with me. It's hard to say that I'm writing for someone. I'm writing, and I know it's not that I'm writing for someone. It's people that have cared for me in the past that I'm able to write. You know what I mean? So it's not me like giving someone. It's something that was given to me, and I'm writing. That's how I think of it. I can't say I'm writing for. I know my poems are filled with Black people. And but I'm not right. That's just who you know what I mean? Like that's just who I am. Yeah.
Well, I want to thank all three of you for sharing your words with us, and maybe we'll do another round of poems. Crystal, can we start with you?
Sure. See what I'm going to read now. Okay. I feel like most of the poems that I'm going to share today are personal. I'm a poet of memory, but I'm also a poet of the moment, right? I don't write really well from prompts. Like, I need the moment. I need the poetic moment, and then I'm off, and I can just rip off of that. So I'm going to read right now, Still Becoming, which is also, keep putting this up there, in the new book, Down to Earth. And this is about adjunct work. If anybody has ever experienced working as an adjunct, you know exactly how disrespectful that is. So it's called Still Becoming. After Full Frame Documentary Festival. At 40 plus, age 40 plus, and I still consider what I can become. The slave wage of an adjunct is choice, the gatekeepers say. So I teach the slave narrative to white affluent students, a lesson they'll never find useful. How to escape bondage without it killing you. I drive 30 miles with sun rising in the east. Every morning I speed. A lesson taken from the oppressor. Never offer overtime without the compensating penny. Often I pass the pulled over brother struggling to gaze into the cop's face through riotous rays. Those days especially, I consider a career change, or at least how I can be a better citizen. The narrative being, we are all keepers with our iPhones and droids on standby. I could become the viral documenter of what can still become of a man, freed a century and 50 years plus under this same magnificent sun.
Leave yourself all over for Grandmother Carrie. Teach me to love the way only the dead know. Sometimes I want to see you so badly, I dream myself full of the reddest wings. I do the things I promised my mother I'd never do again. You wouldn't recognize me now or the town. 3 highways run through old tobacco land. I weep all night for you, will not stop no matter the bright purple festivals, the fireworks that scare everything from the sky. On my way to visit your grave, where you're buried beside your lonesome son, who walked Youngsville all day like an angel no one would give proper wings. I wanted to see you in that small town, where our last name watered a crop of soybeans, labored under a white man's promise. I wanted to see you in that wide graveyard as a cardinal. When I arrived, I wanted there to be Jubilee, chalk red feathers darting the sky like a little blood moon. I think I'll never be through with the dead, my altar full of whole other worlds. When you no longer ghost among your children, grandchildren, when you become fully angel, a bird I let loose in my house, will you still remember us in our jerry-rigged lives? I know it's hard work being dead.
17, intelligent design. The poem is a prayer. It is flag, a skirt. The poem is long. It is as short as your attention span. The poem is medicine, magic, incantation. It is a wish on the wing of a paper plane, a heart written in the sand, taken by tide. It is ancient translation, a transgenerational experience. It is a way back, a way through, a way over. The poem is a gift and an heirloom. The poem is yours. You can keep this one. Put me in the footnote, which will also be a poem, a wish, a prayer, water in the desert, a drop in the ocean, a current riding on the wind, a kite riding on the wind, the thought made manifest in word, in deed, in language, indeed. It is sermon, it is testimony, a church, it is religion, it is meditation, it is grounded and grounding. The poem is waiting, the poem is already here. It is love in an empty heart, it is love, is value, is system. The poem is labor, the poem is present, the poem is astral projection, a sleepwalking miracle. The poem is sound in the silence, an out-of-body experience, gravity and weightless worry. The poem is the dance, the body in motion, divine potion. The poem is gumbo, my granny's hands, my mama's hands, the lines making stanzas, the stanzas, a map.
Thank you. Just so beautiful. You know, one of the things that's really striking me, I'm getting emotional listening to these poems. Poems are triggering emotions, right, in the readers. I assume that they come from emotion when you're writing. What is the relationship between sort of the emotional reason for writing a poem, the emotional impact you want a poem to have, and the intellect it takes? Because it's also such an intellectual process in choosing words. What is the relationship between emotion and intellect in writing poetry?
Oh, that's my jam. I love that. I have this conversation a lot. I mean, I don't think there's no like certain balance. I think some poets can pull off certain things. Some poets can have this stream of conscience that's completely emotional, right? I think of lyric poets. There's also working with intellect, and some poets can have that intellectual line of that triangle, that poetic triangle, a little longer. So I don't think there's like for me, in my mind, that's not a certain intellectual. The talking part of a poem has emotion as well, so they're not separated to me. I think you can have intellectual that's just talking and maybe not emotional, but I don't necessarily separate them. It's kind of hard to talk about because they're separate, but also they work together. It's like maybe like a 3D model. That's how I see it working, something like that around each other.
Like as well, right? I'm just always curious about on the other side. Crystal, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, you know, it's for me, a poem is a emotional response, right? That's the very first thing it is, right? But then I go into, as I'm writing, like this dreamlike state, right? And my the work I'm doing in the poem is I want that dreamlike state to sort of, I mean, you're being philosophical, right? You're trying to figure things out yourself in the poem. I hope it comes across that way. That's what poetry is. It's like that stream of consciousness that you're talking about. But the challenge for me is to record these abstract thoughts, but make them clear enough to be consumed by the reader. Because I really am writing. I'm writing for myself, of course, it's therapeutic, but I'm writing for a reader. I do want the reader to have this sort of visceral response like you're having at the moment.
Any thoughts?
Yeah, like I would agree with what you said. The poem is an emotional experience. I think a lot about, so my upbringing, I grew up in a Southern Pentecostal church here in Chapel Hill. That was like fire and brimstone, women shouldn't preach. Like it was hardcore when I grew up. We have a different preacher now. But I think a big tenet of where I came up in that church was that I saw these pastors get in the pulpit, take a 2,000-year-old metaphor, wrap it up in emotion with passion, and give it back to people in a way that they could apply it to their lives when they walked out of that building. And so I think coming from that lineage, like it's all emotional for me. I think sort of a white institutions and structures create this situation. Like when I hear sort of intellectual, I also hear technical. And I hear like what it means to put this here, and it feels like a mathematic equation. And there's an argument, I believe in divine mathematics, which is different than like calculus and whatnot, and in some ways the same. But I think that sort of technical thing, as a Black American, like, there were a couple hundred years ago, like I couldn't write my name without like being under threat of death in this country or being majorly punished. So it's always an emotional thing for me. I think emotion is the catalyst for writing anything down. For me, it's just like, oh, I felt something. Like I have to like put that down on paper, or I have to put that in my voice memos. And so to me, coming from a church background, like anytime I speak in front of people, it's emotional for me. And I'm working through something. I'm learning something about myself. I'm learning something about the world. And in order to do that, it's got to be emotional for me. There is not a whole lot of technique. I was a horrible English student. Like, got really low grades in my English classes. But poetry is the way I sort of reclaimed the word and was like, okay, this period means what I want it to mean. I can capitalize this letter in the middle of the sentence if I want to, or the middle of the word. And so to me, it is like it is emotional. Mm-hmm. I don't know that there's a difference to me in the two.
To what I didn't read. Just the idea, there are a lot of bad English students who become poets. Poet is more than, poetry is more than words. It's music, right? Mm-hmm. It's song-like, it's music. And you know how we respond to music. It's very passionate, right? So yeah, you're lyrical. When I first became a poet, I was not well-read at all. I did not read poetry, did not write poetry. I would go to spoken word events and watch performances, but I became a poet because I was lyrical, and I sort of naturally had this way of putting words together. So yeah, it's not necessarily about being a good English student. People.
I want you both kind of in your poems mentioned church, and you kind of really just talked about church. It's like I've been thinking about what was our first kind of craft lessons, and for me it was in the summer at my grandma's house, and she would put on Bob Ross before we walked to the IGA, and we would watch that, and I realized like that's why it's so much nature in my poems. I literally watch that every day. This idea of building a world. Would you all say that church was maybe your first craft lesson that you didn't know you were getting?
For me, yeah. Sure. I always say I'm the first like capital A artist in my family, but I grew up in a family of artists. My mama wrote the Christmas play, like come Easter Sunday, fashionistas in the building, rainbow tees, folks were singers, like amazing singers, powerful singers. Like I grew up guitar players, all of that. Mm-hmm. So I think I got introduced to that lyricality and that music and that rhythm and of speech in like testimony service and in like worship service and revivals that lasted all week and all night. So I feel like that was my first, but then I had a dad who was really into like early hip-hop and used to listen to Curtis Blow and Grandmaster Flash and a lot of R&B, Luther Vandross and all that. So I learned a lot between both places, but mama was like, you're gonna be in church on Sunday and Wednesday night, yes, and every revival and joy night, so.
Yeah, my experience with church is the same thing. Southern, well, I went to church in DC, but down here I spent many summers in the South, and so there were two different churches in my Southern family. It was Holiness Pentecostal, and then there was Primitive Baptist, and they could not be further separate. One was fast and lots of music and lots of, rejoicing and shouting, and the other one was slow hymns and call and response. But everything was about performance, right? Everything was about how well you could do that in order to get people to respond and be engaged in the moment. So yeah, church was definitely a part of my first experience with being able to bring words together and emotions together and feelings together and make it make sense.
It's really, I'm so glad you've mentioned performance and music. I mean, certainly just the musicality of your poems, all three of your poems, is coming through clearly in the rhythm of it. I'm curious, this is such an odd situation we're in. We're in a room with five of us, right? How about performing poetry? Does it feel different when you share poetry, reading it live for people as it does when you put it on the page? And because I always tell my students, when you write something down, when someone reads it, it belongs to them now. Like, they're reading your words, but you can't control the way it comes off the page. Whereas when you're reciting a poem, you certainly can. What is it about performance and reading that changes? And I do wish we had people in the room who could be nodding their heads with us as opposed to just me. Does it make a difference to read a poem aloud or to recite a poem?
For me, when I'm writing, I mean, I write out loud. That's why I usually write by myself, because I'm talking out loud. When I'm reading it, I don't know. All right, so usually when I'm writing when I have an early draft of a poem, I usually take it out and get it tested on people. So when I read it out loud, I may notice something, right, in the music of the language that maybe makes me want to change it. I always tell my students to tap your way through your poems as you're reading it, not necessarily keeping a tempo, but trying to follow the language. And usually your hand or that tapping will tell you where the music may be a little off.
Very interesting. Do you enjoy reading poetry to people, Christy?
I enjoy it now much more than I did. I've been doing this for maybe 14 years, but the funny part about it is now I do, but when I first started, everything was extraordinarily personal. I was writing about, my childhood and abuse and all kinds of things, and it was so personal, and I didn't enjoy sharing it very much. And I told my instructor at the time, who's professor of my MFA program, I said, I'm having a hard time with the readings, with the reciting. And he was like, and I said, can you just give me some advice on that? And he's like, oh, it's horrible. We all hate it. And I thought, okay, that's not helpful. But as time went on, I came to understand that that's just part of it, right? Because if you're waiting for people to buy books of poetry, you may be waiting a long time. So you get these wonderful opportunities to share your poems aloud with people, like in venues like this. And I think it makes a big difference. And I think it reaches people who it necessarily would not reach. So I have come to like performance.
I love performance. Like, it's like my favorite part of things. I'm a poet who has been published in many anthologies and other things like that, but I've never published my own personal work. And I think it's because I love performance so much. You're never going to hear the same poem the same way twice, right? And you don't actually, there is a little buffer between, I think, what you offered just a second ago, which is that, like, you actually don't get to own it, right? It actually still is mine. You just got to, like, taste it. And so you get to, like, walk away with that. Even if you took a video on your phone, you get to, like, share the flavor with people, but you don't get to feel like you, like, purchased it and you own it. And I think at some point I will publish poetry, but I really love performance because it really gives people a unique experience. I really think that's where my spirituality and Christianity like evolved, is that I felt like God is this thing that happens when a performance poet or a poet is going in and I feel something and they didn't touch me, right? Like, I feel something in my body and I'm like, whoa, okay. And so in that moment, we've experienced a thing together that, like, it only is going to happen this one time in this one way. And you can tell people about it, but you kind of had to be there, right? Even if you watch the YouTube video, like, you kind of had to be there. And so I love performance for that reason. And when I write, I'm thinking about for myself, like, does this make me feel something? Am I writing from my emotion, as we were talking about before? Am I writing from my pure emotion?
And sometimes those pieces land with people, sometimes they don't. And so I got a short list of pieces that I'm like, okay, this lands. We've tested this, like you were saying. This lands. But these pieces are for me, and I'm going to do them on the day that I feel like it's a me day.
Do you?
Go. You sure?
No, you.
I just want to know, like, so you know, there's always these controversies of spoken word and how different it is from literary poetry, and then you have the combination, the people who can actually collaborate, like Simone Smith, and be spoken word, and then also, you know, make wonderful literary poems and publish them and package them really nicely. What do you feel like the difference is between spoken word and composing a spoken word poem as opposed to just a formal or informal free verse literary poem?
Yeah, I'm not like my immediate thought is like there's not a difference. And I think that the struggle to try to differentiate plays into, I don't know that we're always trying to do this when we differentiate, but I know that the powers that be win off of us differentiating between the two, because people can say this is academic poetry and this is not, right? But I do think that I think the poets are the difference. The way that we intersect into life, the way we interact in life. I know a lot of literary poets who people don't know who they are, but performance poets, spoken word poets, I often say, I am both canvas and artist and medium. So when you hear my poem, you see me. There is no like, it doesn't have this sort of wall art effect where somebody can be like, oh, that's a beautiful picture or image. And I could walk in here and people would know I took the image. But with poetry, I walk around and people see me and they see my poems. And so I think that plays into, and there's a really sort of like, there's an effect that has on the way that you write and the way that you craft a thing, and it feels more conversational rather than like, a lot of my poems, they're just talking to people. And I add in some rhymes and some lyric devices and things like that.
As opposed to an artifact.
I'm saying this as a person with books, but I do really love that maybe the book is some type of a wall, maybe. I'm thinking of it as something that I can give you, but also, we're also thinking about our particular history in this country. This also can be seen as a wall, but I do like this idea that you really embody your work, and so you don't need a book to walk around. The poems are there with you. I really like that.
It's a beautiful concept. Well, I want to just thank everyone who's joining us out there in the ether. And I do see we have some questions coming in on the question and answer. I want to encourage you to put questions there. We will have a session at the very end today where we're going to dive right into audience questions only. What I would like to do now is we're going to have maybe one more round of poems. And then we'll take a short break at 11:05 for about 15 minutes. But why don't we start? We'll go back in the original order, and maybe we'll start with CJ and do another round of poems. And thank you so much for your wonderful reflections. This is exactly what we were looking for. And the poetry is absolutely beautiful. There's such rhythm and power.
Let's see. I'm ready. Yeah, you did.
If Tyree has a poem he'd like to read, I can go there and give you some time to think about which poem you'd like.
Yeah, I got one. We're good.
Okay.
Cool. We're ready. 10, bulletless gun. The dump truck in front of me is dropping rocks off the top. I speed up, go around, then I see him. Standing at the back left corner of his car, I have been indicted by the bulletless gun. Made apparent by his rush to the driver's seat, I slow down, not even sure how fast I was going. My heart beats into my throat. Blood runs cold. My skin is on fire. There is no escape. The safest place in the monster's mouth. He is in the monster's mouth. He is next to me. Then behind me, the lights come on, blue and white. Any other days, these colors would call me fan, but today they call me guilty. Where do I put my hands? Do I wait for him to ask for my registration? I reach for it, find it, 60 and a 45. I explain. He circles back to the car. When the wait gets beyond 2 minutes, I know how I've become prey. I pray. He returns. says he would let me off with a warning, but my license is revoked. I flash back to an issue I know I have resolved. I explain he can only go by what he knows, what the food chain says. The predators have not and do not communicate with each other on who is free and who is food, and there is blood in the water. He takes my license, tells me to park the car. He leaves. I sit for a while, weigh my emotions, turn the ignition, and swim back into the deep.
Follow him. Okay. This is called Song of Self, and this is about myself going into the community and volunteering, as I talked about earlier. A song of self. I've known only two true Christians. One visited jails to convince girls only God's kingdom, not freedom, was free. So I get Sundays done this way, vain as an atheist, smiling into the camera at the barbed wire gate. They take my jacket, backpack of supplies, keys, and phone. So I make no qualms that a door with bars is a cage for juvenile black males, let out into the sunlit commons or left in cells, shut out by the exterior light switch the guard swats off. With only a cup of water and a prison handbook, a poetry lesson is in order, a song of self. This is how we let what's in out.
Carry me. I followed the shimmer far down a road I still haven't found the ending to. I picked up my life, my mother sewn a map to the back of, so one day I'll lay it out and travel back to the flat land of eastern North Carolina, a map to land where my body will die, where my ghost won't ride the trains all night, count steps from liberty to home. I tried to find the ocean before I was covered in southern soil. I put my head underneath the Atlantic, swallowed so many memories. I'm filled with people. Someone has taught me to fly. Whichever way I flew, my inheritance couldn't be lifted from northeastern North Carolina's wet clay, its hands hardened around my already weighted ankles. My mother's mother planted hydrangeas where I wanted to place an ocean. Where I wanted to place an ocean, she grew me. I picked up my life, for it was the only one I had to pick up. How the body must pick itself up if no one is around to offer a rounded hand out of the snow that only buries. Stuck to my life were the same things I carry back with me now. My father's lying I've mastered, and wear the way a field wears the bones of birds. The green tint of gin bottles my uncles made of their bare nights. My mother, the only reason I have something to pick up.
CJ Suitt, Crystal Simone Smith, Tyree Daye, thank you. We'll be back in about 15 minutes. Thank you all. Hello, welcome back, everyone. We're delighted to bring round two of this incredible day to you today. I just want to also thank a few more people before we begin. I'm actually looking at Vicky Breeden, who normally is back in the office and was back in the office earlier, making sure everything is running great, but we can't thank Vicky enough for all the work that she does in organizing these programs, making you all have access to them and whatnot. And I also want to thank Paul Bonici, who is just has become our sine qua non. They have to share that title, Vicky and Paul do, for all the work that Paul does with the technology and getting this going for us. It's been quite an incredible learning experience, and Paul has just been absolutely remarkable. So thank you, Paul. Thank you, Vicky. Thank you, Lloyd Kramer, who's out in the audience, for being our wonderful director, and all the staff at Carolina Public Humanities. I do want to pivot gears quickly for a moment to just talk about, I mentioned the incredible importance of the humanities, especially in the critical situation we're in our society. And I want to point specifically at the work that Carolina K-12 does. Carolina K-12 is our subsidiary in which we bring the best faculty and scholarship and ideas and arts to the teachers of North Carolina. Again, our besieged teachers of K through 12 schooling throughout North Carolina are not getting the support that they need and are certainly being questioned in their teaching. And we give them the resources that they need, access to the incredible scholarship, lesson plans that dovetail with the Department of Public Instruction's guidelines. And we bring them to teacher workshops like our Teaching Hard History workshops. We bring 30 teachers to locations in Goldsboro and New Bern and Chapel Hill, bring them for extensive multi-day workshops where they can get access to scholarship on teaching really difficult topics like gender rights, the history of slavery in our state, the history of Jim Crow, social justice, environmental justice, all issues that are difficult to teach, but absolutely essential to teach in our classrooms. And so I'm going to ask you today, folks, we support these programs entirely through the generosity of our donors. We'd like to thank the North Carolina Honor Society for being a wonderful supporter, but we do need support so that we can bring this scholarship to our teachers and support our teachers throughout the state. I know Paul is probably putting in some information on how you can give to humanities, to the Carolina Public Humanities Program. And we just want to make sure you know that your money will go to the teachers and to support their work at this very essential and critical stage. So thank you for considering giving to Carolina Public Humanities. You know that all your donations are tax deductible and we appreciate donations of any amount. So thank you again. And we're going to start with some poetry. As we move into the second round, I want to remind folks, please start putting questions in that question and answer button there. We will have a session at the end of today in which we'll be inviting the audience to participate and ask our poets any questions they would like. In this second session, we're pivoting a little bit more. We were talking, it's really hard to distinguish where the personal and the political begin and end, but we're going to be talking a little bit about poetry as power, and we're going to start again with some reading. So thank you again for our poets, Tyree Daye, Crystal Simone Smith, and CJ Suitt. Take it away.
To all poets from Northeastern North Carolina, it's just getting hot, dogwoods showering our shoulders with flowers. I saw dead baby birds on a trail, so I know new life has arrived, lost in the survival of pine and ash. I'll say it plainly, we need you down here. Yesterday, my uncle put a nail through his thumb, working for the same white man he's worked for since 6th grade. Last night, his blood fell on the bathroom floor and made a star he couldn't follow. He needs to hear your poems.
Chronicling Light, July 2020. The sun lifts no matter the day. It lifts its light no matter the hospital room, no matter the morning sea. Light returns no matter the street or the beating, no matter the protests. It lifts to be faced no matter the ruling majority, no matter the ailing parents' groan, no matter yesterday's devastation. Light returns no matter the news of a loved one under 100 pounds, weathered and withering. Light lifts onto shattered window or lilac field, no matter the grazing prey or the preyed on, no matter his speed or his hunter or the gun sounding.
The body is a weapon. When it does not mean to be, demands space it does not ask for. Heirloom cursed and blessed, a vessel brimming with possibility and expectation. I remember not having this feeling of otherness, constant astral projection, being here but not. I know this place too well. Still trying to figure how to uncage the maze, what that is existence here in the now, current prescription, whether to take this or not, how to live fullness in a world so small. This body repels, fall victim to the gravity of perception. The body is not a weapon, though it can be formed into one, sharpened, forged, wielded, clenched like a fist. I be more sphinx. All questions, being in this body, the space gets small, very small, like a box in a cave that everyone can see from the outside enough to decide they know what it means. This skin speaks a lot before I do. Like when I walk into the store, it says, "Hi, everyone. I'm headed to the shoe section or the chip section or the beer section." The body speaks a lot. Like when I walk into a bar and it says, "I just want to fuck or flirt or ghost you or gaslight you, play consent, pretend woke." I remember this, and I am remembering myself, leaning into and learning love into now and presence. How might we survive the encounter, the challenge of this life, to stay black and live a full life? The staying is so much harder than the being. I am asked every day to deny myself 3 times or more, to say that I am not what I know myself to be.
The body speaks a lot. I love it. I'm not. I was thinking about what you said earlier about the memory. What we all said about memory. This idea of piecing things together. I just want to. Can you say more about that? Because I feel like that's what I'm trying to do. Like I'm trying to put some. Maybe it's a map. Maybe it's a story. Maybe those are the same things together in my head. How do you think about this idea of like piecing together when you think about memory in your poems?
Yeah, I think what I learned from my elders is that, like, when you think, like, you don't really figure it out ever in this lifetime. Like the answers never come, so be prepared. You just have this beautiful sort of patchwork quilt at the end of it, and you're like, this is a frame. And I think, to me, like, that piecing together poems are a way that I sort of piece it together, so that when we arrive at transition from this life, that there is a like patchwork of relationships and connections and people, and a connection to past and a lineage and a future that feels like it can be like passed down and passed forward. And so I think for me, that sort of like remembering myself and that memory of like, all right, what is a body? I think we're told so much in our world what our bodies are and are not. And I think as you become an adult, what you realize is that you have to, my mom always told me, she'd read the Bible to me a lot, and she'd be like, ultimately I can read it for you, but you got to get it for yourself. And like, I think that's the worst advice she feels like she ever gave me, because then I like left the church and was like real spiritual and like have a critique of the church now. And but I believe in that way in terms of memory. We all have to get it for ourselves on our own life path, and I think poetry is a technology for that for me.
How about you, Crystal and Joy? In dealing with memory and the present and the future, what do you think about that you're piecing together?
I don't know. Story, and definitely my journey. It's very personal. But of course, it's also universal. We all have similar experiences. And even this poem I read, Chronicling Light, is one of my pandemic poems. I don't have that many, but it's one of my pandemic poems. I think when the pandemic struck, we all understood we lived as isolationists in this country. We do. We all like our little suburbs and our neighborhoods, and we all like to drive a car with one person in it that's designed for 6. And that's just kind of who we are in this country. And I think we've never felt more isolated when the pandemic happened. But then, that sort of collision of protest and the isolation was very interesting to me, to the point where I think that obviously, they came together because of the fact that we were isolated, but then things were still happening. Ridiculous things like George Floyd. I mean, that's absolutely ridiculous, right? And so there was a collision of anger and rage that happened. And it's sad that that's how we have to unify in this country, because contentment means isolation, right? If I'm content, I can be over here in my really nice house with my my car and my kids in this really nice neighborhood, and I don't have to worry about anything else. And for me, just it's my journey. The memories that I'm recording and, as CJ said, documenting is my journey, but it's also universal, and it's meant to sort of be looked at that way and critiqued that way, and hopefully people can digest it and make something of it.
The last year has been such an incredible year for, well, frankly, a racial reckoning, and long overdue, half actualized, and hope and a work that we're all involved in. And certainly when we think of Nicole Hannah Jones' situation in the 1619 Project, and a sense of what I'm getting at is you're talking about personal memory. Crystal, you mentioned sort of universal ideas that also everyone shares, but I'd like to think a little bit more specifically about collective memory in the Black community, and if you feel poetry allows you to access that collective memory, or give voice to that collective memory, or not. Just your reflections on that.
For me, these poems and everything I write, it's a story that I've been told before, that I'm telling you, even if I don't realize that. And when I'm going back, right, the reason that my poems are filled with people, because when I'm going back, I'm thinking about them too. And so I have my personal memory, but I have my family's collective memory, and then I have that, I want to say, Southern Black history too. That I think that all of that stuff is in conversation when I'm writing a poem. But because, right, these literally every poem in here is something that I've been told, right, that was passed down to me. Even if I don't even realize it at the time, I know that it's true. And so there's always plenty of people in the room with me, right, and having a conversation, even if it's a really personal poem, right, because my narrative is connected to my mother's narrative, who's connected to her mother, right, her mother. And so it's always this really large conversation that we're having.
And that's what I love about Tyree's poetry. He's so much more like the awareness of ghosts and ancestors, and he has such a close relationship with them in his work, and it's amazing to me. But yeah, I think poetry is song, right? And song is very prevalent in the Black experience, in slavery, in the civil rights movement, right? And when I see what happened with Nicole Hannah Jones, I watched social media, and that in its own self, I know that's controversial, the use of social media, but it was almost like a rising song, right? Everybody, posted their idea. It was injustice, right? And so there was this rising song of that injustice, and it opened up a dialogue, and it opened up a national dialogue. And so I think poetry in that vein can do the same thing.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and saying that I think when moments like that happen, like poetry and art reminds us that it is injustice, because I think we live in a world that would like to numb us from really being able to feel and understand that, like, actually what we're experiencing is injustice. And I think for me, in terms of collective memory and being a Black American, thinking about that for hundreds of years, like, my ancestors on this land were not allowed to write anything down. We're not allowed to do, in many ways, what I'm doing. And thinking about that, I often feel like their words are coming through me. The words that they could not write down, could not share into the world, are like coming through me in this time. And I think that in many ways, we are also like visionaries. We're holding on to the past while we envision a different and better future, which our ancestors really did in some very poignant ways. We're talking about like families being ripped apart on this land, and somehow we managed to, all Black folks were a part of a family, no matter where they ended up, no matter who their blood was, like they were taken care of, and they took care of each other. And so like just that being passed forward, and that being a core tenet of my work, is like, this is how we take care of each other. This is how is acknowledging what's happening and also envisioning a different future. And so, yeah, I definitely feel that sort of collective consciousness as a Black American come through in my work.
I love that what you all say about songs, that maybe these are like little individual songs, but put together They're like one big song that we're
Collective, yeah.
singing.
And beautiful songs as well. Maybe we could hear another round of poetry. Crystal, would you like to start?
I will start. This is another pandemic poem. It's called, and this is about my grandmother, who's very Southern, very religious woman. She's passed on now, but and also a very outspoken, rebellious woman as well. So, folks who like hell and high water. January 6, 2021. Drowning in our nation's recent hell, I cling to humid evenings, circa 1984. My granny reading her town's paper on the porch, a cigarette swinging loose in her lips. She scrolls and turns the colossal pages with a 10th grade education, learns all the callous acts of her local and state politicians have executed that week. Wise but not so refined, she dog cusses and utters one of her country adages. Ain't gonna piss on me and tell me it's raining. Then she commences letters, scrawling out her unpolished opinions, urging change, threatening to vote against if they don't comply. In another land, less scorched and hosed, she may have graduated high school, went on to study policy, prospered, put her political mind to notable use. But America's land is vast with hatred and hard labor, like the years she spent in the plant inspecting shirts by hand, the better jobs for Blacks in town. Now, 30 years closed, the stretch where it once loomed, renamed Elastic Plant Road, honoring not one soul who paced the cement floors in 12-hour shifts and unregulated heat. On a Confederate-named highway, I rushed to her bedside when she died, a television blaring evening news in the hospital room. 10 years later, the blare of white terrorists emboldened, storming the Capitol floor. Why, my youngest son demands to know. I sigh and choose adage over truth. As my granny would say, there's some folks who like hell and high water.
CJ?
In the aftermath, I'm sure I'll feel like a tourist passing through my own life. I'll add up my subtractions, stand in the great divide, multiplying the things I have left. In the aftermath of all this, I'll sing with you. In a choir stand on street corners and at my favorite karaoke night, I'll stroll aimlessly around the mall, even though I hated them all. We'll brush shoulders and walk down the same aisles. I'll make you a meal. I'll never leave the party early without a really good excuse, and we'll dance. Bump and grind, spin and dip. I'll give you a spoonful of my ice cream. I'll let you try my beer. A forkful of my favorite dessert. We'll pass homemade dishes around a full potluck dinner table. We'll have hugs so close and tight the world will burst into giggles. I'll hold my friends' children. Kiss the foreheads of my nieces and nephews. You won't have to look for the smile in my eyes above my mask. We'll get a window seat. As we watch friends and lovers gather on lawns and in courtyards, I'll remember the things that brought me strength, the ways I gave and was given to, how I learned to pause and breathe in the day, how I made a feast of my feelings and served it up poem after poem, seeing myself both seed and tree. The world will see me in full color, Black and American. A resilient ancestry will hold our leaders and officers accountable. We won't be so well adjusted to injustice, and we will allow suffering to speak. We'll get to work and heal together. In the aftermath, I'll reach into my pocket for a letter from my past self that reads, I will be here for you. Yes, always and forever. Even when the world stops and the cards have all folded and you are in between the lines.
Tyree, before you begin, could I ask you just pull your microphone down a little bit to face? There you go.
Ain't gonna piss on me Um, field notes on leaving. Geography could not save me. The North Star is irrelevant, miles and miles above my head. I don't want constellations any nearer. I know there are whole cities all over this country, so bright you can't see the stars, the sky no wider than the heart is wide. The night President Obama was elected, we danced in the street of my small university to My President is Black. My first time on my own, I was bright and felt like I had a father. Every one of us was flying. A blunt passed around, we got lifted. My heart to lift, all the world to explore. If there were stars, we could hold them. I've never been through airport security without being pulled to the side and searched. To know you can die anywhere doesn't feel like flying anywhere. I can't go to Canada and leave my mama here alone. If you see me dancing a two-step, I'm sending a starless code. We're escaping everywhere. I can't afford to think like Whitman that whomever I meet on the road I shall love, and whoever beholds me shall love me. Doing the Dougie, trying to find the ocean, looking everywhere.
Yes.
Thank you. Three very powerful poems. I'm curious. You know, we live in a world together. We live in a world that's not just full of poets, and a lot of people see what is going on, can see the injustice. Does the poetic sensibility help you see the world differently? The resources that you put in, the practice that you put into words, that you put into weaving together emotion and intellect in your work, do you think it affects the way you see the world, or when you see the world, can you instantly see the poetic resonance in you? How does that work, the relationship?
You know, as a haiku poet, I'm constantly aware of my surroundings and of nature. And I think even, you know, people who are not haiku poets, just poets in general, it's a blessing and a curse, the awareness, right? Because it is kind of constant, right? Not that you're looking for it, it's just heightened, right? And so it's there, and, you know, there are moments that you take and you document and you record. You know, I don't know if it is a blessing or a curse. Sometimes I feel like it's a good thing. Other times I feel like I'm angry a lot, and I'm angry more than I want to be, right? I think some people who don't experience this heightened sense of awareness tend to be a lot more centered and calm. But that a poet doesn't have that luxury, not in my opinion. Maybe you guys feel differently.
Yeah, I mean, I think to me, I've like told a lot of like people I've been in a relationship with in the past is that like poetry is my primary partner. Like, which means it is always there for me. It's gonna be there when you leave. Right. It is always present with me, and it always is speaking to me. Sometimes I enter space, especially like if I'm traveling or somewhere, and I just like go quiet because the space is speaking to me. And oftentimes I'll be with like a lover or a friend or somebody with me, and they're like, "What's wrong? You in a mood?" And I'm like, "No, like my primary partner is speaking to me right now. I'm listening. Right? I see this thing happening, and the words are happening right now for me." And so I feel like, to me, that's a thing that's very present with me. Like poetry is always present for me in every little moment. Like, and I think we walk through the world so much, and people are not paying attention to the details. And I grew up with this phrase, like, the devil's in the details. I think God is also in the details. And if we don't, like, most people aren't walking through the world and looking for the details. And I think as a poet, I'm always being like, what's the smallest thing? What's the quietest thing?
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
What's that in the corner of my eye? That feels true to me.
Yeah, I really love that, the smallest thing. That's what I think I'm looking for. I don't know. I'm a poet, but I was a human being first, so sometimes that looking becomes too much, and I don't want to look anymore, and so I turn away. Also, just me in general. Like I can spend all day by myself. That's not a problem. Well, I'm married, so it is a problem, of course. But for me, that's that quiet space, right? That looking around, like that's my time to do that, and just to wonder, right? That's what it was with me about. So we just saw someone just walk by. So where are they going? And I wonder, right? And but I think that wondering also is me a little hiding as well. I know my magic is hiding, right? So when an ancestor shows up in my poem and they're there and they're walking around like they're alive, that's me also hiding from maybe a type of grief. So I look, but then I look away. I'm looking, then I'm like, oh, it's too much, and I look away. It's constant.
Thank you for that. Maybe we should hear some more poems. CJ?
Homeward, or Meditations on Insurrection. Can I live knowing what I know and not share it, or share it and be thought a madman? Knowledge can be so heavy. The bricks of 1,000 libraries on my back, I write tracks to train vision, set in motion a mission, to be and behold, to see and be seen, and listen for the ways I can help. What do you do when your world goes? The truth you knew grows into a lie, the ivy covering your eyes, a beautiful sculpture, yet haunting shape to live inside. Ancestral memory clicks. What must it have been like to survive the hull of a ship, placed on plantation and told you are no longer allowed to choose, to know the truth you knew could be of use, but the world offers only a noose. If the story is spoken too loud in the wrong language, the colonizer, a manipulative savior, the flicker of present memory. This ain't really my business, but the mind of a proud boy willing to die for the image of a country that never was, that is currently dying, sacrificing all that he holds sacred for sake of statement. Don't tread on me. Funny how the white rabbit can become a snake, how the cross becomes an eagle, a Bible, a constitution, and we are all stuck in some ideology or another, willing to kill ourselves over beliefs. Some deaths are slow, others on the other side of a barrel, aged in molasses, soaked in indignance. How will we survive when all we have known is gone? There is more to life than ritual sacrifice. You cannot come clean on a soapbox. How can I be humbled by another's experience without being shamed out of existence? I want to live a fantastic story where I learn to be wrong, to grow into newness, without the threads of my history hanging in tatters.
All right. Where she planted hydrangeas. A lot. The mechanical cotton picker for Black Chicago poets. It wasn't that they killed John Boy in front of his mama's small blue house and that no one called her Miss Bluebird anymore out of respect, though she never minded the name. It made her believe she'd fly off someday. Or that the sheriff let John Boy's body sit until even the babies stopped crying, their eyes filled with him, his body already going to marble no one would be able to lift from their sleep. It was that we could feed ourselves then by getting down on our hands and knees to pick cotton, and most knew what a body smelled like blowing down a dirt road. When Chicago reached my ear, the war was full of bodies. They sent whole train cars for us black folk. I read The Defender and waited to hide my face behind the curtains of a northbound train, and I prayed the train car would fly. The South truly don't want us to go. A Mississippi cop would catch a family disappearing behind a rainstorm and send them home, the clouds leaving 4 muddy fields at a time. I left like a season's first lover across a window, slowly like a southern sun diagonal on a work back. I wanted to carry my aunts to Chicago with me, like this obituary-filled Bible. These plums I got saved, purpling in my bag.
A Case for Equal Melancholy, after reading Edgar Allan Poe. During the whole of any dull, dark day, depressed men rise to murder us. Instead of reform, lawmakers petition for more Ritalin and ammunition. A woman in fake pantsuits was poised to run the whole male melancholy world and lost. The suffrage campaign during the whole of dull, dark days of no voices, no divorces, of near-death childbirths revived with new signage and marches. Caitlyn Jenner once proclaimed, "The hardest thing about being a woman is deciding what to wear." She, who's privileged and unaware. During the whole of any dull, dark day, desolate women don't make headlines, like the percentage who give birth in prison. Their due dates kept a mystery from them so they don't escape. How often they are shackled in labor, given 24 hours to bond with their infant, and no treatment for postpartum depression.
Well, these are very heavy poems that we need to hear. And brings me to the question of audiences. And how do you, what role does poetry speak in speaking to different audiences? I'm talking in particular about white audiences and black audiences. And how can poetry help translate the pain and suffering that I just heard and the collective memory and trauma that I just heard, translate that to white audiences? And is poetry the best vehicle to do that in an effective way? And if so, how?
I don't know about the vehicle. I mean, I'm thinking about the Bible and religion. If religion and this idea of like Christianity, like the true idea of Christianity can't do it, poetry definitely not going to do it. You know what I was thinking about that question. I'm sure we all had this experience. You've been in a poetry reading. You're reading for a white majority audience, and you read a poem that's serious in your mind, but then you hear laughs.
Yeah.
And you're like, wait, I'm literally talking about someone dying here. I don't know how that answers the question. I don't know. I'm writing just for this little street that I grew up on in Youngsville. And I'm just thinking about those people. So I don't know how people react to my work. I know who I'm writing it for. I know who I'm thinking about. The rest of that, I just leave it up to them. But that's my approach. I'm also not the most personal person, right? Like I was just raised where I don't care. Like, this is my people, we love, like anything else is.
No, yeah, I'm saying what I have to say and I'm documenting it, right? And I'm hoping it reaches, a certain, race or demographic or, young person or whatever. I can't control whether it does or not. I think it's very interesting how many of us, all of us, and how many of our poems have the word kill in them, right? And that's really, I think, where we are. It's almost like a plea, right? The poems are like a plea to really look at this, right? And in this country, we are, and it's gun laws and it's all of that, but we are really tasked to accept the worst we can do to each other. And we're expected to be okay with that. Even in some cases, it transcends race. Like we talk about mass shootings, right? That it's not okay. You can't ask us to accept that, So you're going to hear a lot of that in our poems. And I think that is a really good vehicle, a good use of poetry, right? For it to really be a call, a plea for people to understanding, and anger and frustration at what's going on. So in that way, it does serve, I think, a higher purpose than just our personal response, emotional response to something.
Yeah, that's so important. I think that purpose is to contextualize the world that we are experiencing. I think between like memes and all the sort of like news and everything people hear, there's not a like human-based contextualization for all the things that are happening in the world, right? People are able to do their own sort of interpreting in their homes, as it were, last year a lot, like about like, what does this mean? And what are the people, just like able to form their own opinions about why Target is on fire in Ferguson, or And I think the poet shows up and says, actually, there's more context to this. Those buildings are insured. They will be fine, right? These people are, this is actually a cry for like, hey, show up, please, you know? And I think that it's easy, especially I experienced this growing up in a white town, like in Chapel Hill, what is thought of as a white town, where Black and brown people have been pushed to the rural areas, that like it became really important for these white folks who felt like they were doing good because they signed the change.org petition, or they sent money way away to like other places in the country, to know that actually these struggles are right here, right? What we're talking about in the larger world is happening right here. One of my sort of I have a love-hate relationship with study abroad programs, right? Like teaching students, privileged students, that like all the problems are somewhere else in the world. And I think poets come to say, particularly folks who are in your community, to say, actually there are folks who need food and meals right here in your community. There are folks who grew up without running water right here in your community, right? And so I think poets come in whatever voice they do. Like, I don't know that I write for a white audience. I'm sharing my experience as a person who doesn't see myself represented in the story that people are telling in this area, you know? And so, yeah, I think they're like, you know, as I'm writing, I'm like, what needs to be said? Like, is it necessary? Is it helpful? Has it been said already? And if the answer to the first two questions are like yes, and the last question is no, then I'm writing it and I'm sharing it with the rest of the world. And so, and really, I would agree with you, Tyree, is that like I write for Councilville, which is off of 54 West out here. It's the neighborhood I grew up in. I write for those folks, you know, and I'm writing from that Southern Pentecostal holiness background and figuring out how do we make Christianity into the beautiful religion that it can be. I still struggle whether I didn't identify as a Christian. I think Jesus was a rad dude who did amazing things on the planet, but like, you know, at the same time, I'm like, how do we make the world bigger, right? And smaller at the same time. So I don't know if that's a direct answer. I jumped around a little bit, but yeah.
That's very helpful. You know, CJ, you mentioned something, I think it was from the very first poem you were reading, maybe the second poem that you recited for us, and you made a reference to hip hop and white kids listening to hip hop. And I'm wondering about the receptiveness of white ears to Black messages, and if that interaction of seeing white people interacting with hip hop is informative or educational for you about the way that white ears hear Black voices.
Yeah, everybody can hear, but are you listening? Right? Like, it's like this is something that has come out of struggle for people. Like, you don't just get to pick it up and not acknowledge the lineage. I think in Black families, we are always looking to our elders. Yeah. Right? We're always looking to the folks who made the way before us. And I think that's not always the case in white families and folks who are hearing hip hop and just experience it as art. And I think we have a deeper relationship. It's not just technique, like it's emotion. It is emotion. It is somebody's personal life and narrative. And so I think the lens to be able to not just hear, but to listen, I think is different in white culture than it is in Black culture. And so I think there can be a lot of cases in which like white folks are hearing hip hop music, but not understanding that like hip hop artists are writers. They are our modern day journalists. And in some cases, when we're talking about money, 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 how many women I got, they're actually saying the same thing that corporate CEOs are saying. Like my brand, my money, my team, like, and so in many ways, they're telling us what is happening in the world through all those, like, it's like, okay, this is actually the priority. And actually low key passing us in the same way that Negro spirituals and all sorts of songs did, passing us the information in a coded, like, you know, hip hoppy way of like, okay, this is actually how CEOs are seeing the world. I think about that when I listen to a Cardi B song. I think about that when I listen to 21 Savage or Drake. I'm like, okay, actually, if I imagine you're a white corporate CEO, this makes a lot of sense.
Or this is how you want the world to see it.
Yeah.
To see Black culture.
Right. This is how you want to see it. You want the world to see it. Right. And so, yeah, I mean, I just think like there's a less of an analysis of it from white culture. And that's not everybody. I have a lot of white hip hop artist friends who honor the culture and and the lineage, but that's, yeah.
Thoughts on white ears, if I could, and how they hear the information and what I mean, it seems like an awful burden to put on a poet to have to be translating for the listener.
Oh yeah, I don't do that. I
don't-
do
That's
that.
great. Yeah.
I don't care. Like, I really, honestly, like, I don't explain. I don't. Yeah, I don't.
I know a lot of white people my age raising children. I should admit suburban white people my age, and there is this idea of teaching your children tolerance, right? And wanting your children to listen to Black hip hop music and wanting them to experience everything and being culturally kind of competent. But that's hard to do when we're isolationists, right? When you want to live in a white neighborhood and put a Black Lives Matter sign down in your lawn, but you know no Black people, or your children don't have any Black friends, even though you're very down and liberal and whatever. And so that as Richard Wright said one time, it starts in the home, right? So I don't know how authentic white ears are all the time, because I don't know what the real space you're coming from, right? Do you have Black friends? Have you experienced, being at a Black table, a dinner table or whatever? I don't know what that is. And so when it's that fragmented, what are you taking from the music or the poem, So.
Thank you for that. Maybe we should hear some more poems. CJ, would you like to start?
Walk in the light, beautiful light. Come where the dewdrops of mercy shine bright. Shine all around us by day and by night. People, the light of the world. It is my world. It processes with me. If I stop, it stops. Keep moving, keep pushing. When they say it should all be the same. When they say God said it. When they say God is it. When they say God believes it. When they say God is white. When they say God is man. When they say God is jealous, vengeful, wrathful. When they say God would have it that way. Like God is in the line at Burger King. When they say God believes in meat. When they say God lives in a book. When they say God don't dance, don't curse, don't party, don't hang out with people who don't shout out his son by bumper sticker, tattoo, or other bodily accessory. When they say who God is. When they claim who God was. When they legislate who he will be. When they say God hates fags. When they say God don't make people like that. When they say God is not the stone, not the tree, not the synaptic gap. When they say God is not nebula and stardust. When they say God is from earth. When they say God is from another planet. When they say God is the government. When they say God is not the government. When they say it is God's will, God let them die, decided we should live. When they say God don't give handouts, but he do give bailouts. When they say God believes in oil and fracking. When they say God is only Jesus, only Buddha, only Muhammad. When they say God hates your lifestyle, and they really mean you. When they say God hates you, and they really mean your lifestyle. When they say God hates your girlfriend, hates your boyfriend, says your brother's transgendered body is an abomination. When they say God hates, 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 when they say God kills, believes in war, eugenics, massacres, the NSA in Guantanamo Bay. When they say God believes in predator drones and standardized testing and neighborhood schools and voter ID and covered women and loud men. When they say God don't like sex, don't have sex, is not both infinite and intimate. When they say God gave men all the hard and authority and women all the soft and obedient. When they say they found him like God was lost somewhere in a segregated sandbox. When they say God is intolerant, progressive, Democrat, Republican, a separatist. When they say God made us in his image. When they say we were God, not made, given a God made in man's image, a jealous God. A God that needs to be served, worshiped, praise, a human God. It is our world. It processes with us. If we stop, it stops. Keep moving, keep pushing, even when they say it should all be the same.
Industrial work for Ray Fredrell. I had an uncle who dreamed of being an entrepreneur, but settled into industrial work. Like a factory conveyor belt, he became nothing more than an instrument of the process. He drove rigs filled with some entrepreneur's products, hours upon hours, a dull drone abiding. He never had wealth, but unlike the CEO, he had time to bring a rig over Colorado highlands, pull it onto the shoulder, and quell its black exhaust. An escape of gemstone blues, crystal lakes mirroring glacier snowcaps. Time to step down, not into a stalled life, but one delivered here in God's cupped hands.
The world grows. Once the world no bigger than railroad divided Youngsville. Once we made it to South Carolina, all of us alive for the family reunion. Once, 2 miles from the city limits, my uncle was pulled out of the car to have his coin-filled pockets searched. Once, to see the ocean, we took the back way out of town. We lived in a circled path and made do behind kerosene's heat. Once, my mother, in the shape of God, pointed to the moon in the screen door. Around a card table with her brothers and sisters, in gin they trusted the squash would sprout away. Once I trusted a hand pointing north. Once I called for a wolf and a man walked out of the night. I walked Youngsville and walked myself down on the map I was making. Once, for my birthday, my family gathered near the rusted cars in our backyard, and my happiness the color of balloons.
I'd like to ask, perhaps just to have you three comment on a certain aspect of the other person's poetry that you admire or find, inspirational. If that's too much of an ask, because it's so different. Your poems are all so different, and yet they're all sort of speaking in this arena. So I'm just curious how you're responding to each other.
As Tyree mentioned, I published his first chapbook with my indie press, Backbone Press, many years ago. I don't even know how long ago it was now. But, I was drawn to his work almost immediately. It was ghostly. It was haunting. He clearly wanted to exhibit and possessed a relationship with ancestors, and it was just amazing to me. And I felt haunted every time I read one of his poems. And so I think that is really his hallmark and what he does best. And, he's well on a trajectory to be the best at that in the literary world, because it's just amazing. And Tyree, I don't know how many people know this, is relatively young. Are you even 30 yet?
I'm 30.
Oh, you're 30. But he's and he started writing when he was really young. So that's what I like about his poetry. Your poetry just knocks me out. I won't even go there. It just knocks me out, and I regret that I have not seen you yet in a spoken word arena, but I'm going to.
I wanted to say about both of you, I love listening to your mind work in your poems. And so we start with this memory, you'll wander through that memory, and then something in that memory will lead you on to something else. And I just feel like, always a fan of drawing people's poems out. I would love to draw your two poems because they're like spider webs, where we start with this memory, maybe that line, we wander to something else, that has sparked something, we just keep. And then it's almost like a big circle. We always return to whatever we begin with, right? And so it's one big circle with smaller circles inside of it, maybe. But yeah, I just love to watch. Just listen to both of your minds work. It's really amazing.
Yeah, I think I would reflect that back to you all as well. Like, I think there's just like a pacing, a speed at which you all deliver, and that really pulls me in. Like, I feel like, okay, I'm there, I'm with you, singing the like Bible song, I'm with you, there in that moment. And even if I haven't really gotten the full visual of where I'm at, there are enough sort of pillars there that I'm like, I am somewhere, I have arrived. And really, I think for both of you, it feels like arrival in this way in hearing your work. And I just been sitting here giddy about buying your work. At the end of this, and be like, yes, I have to have these work. Yeah, so I feel like that's the reflection on it.
And we have been putting, just as an aside here, we have been putting where you can access many of these works. And we also want to shout out to our dear partners, Flyleaf Books, which I know carries poetry. I know I've seen your work there, Tyree, as well. So, Tyree, you were going to add something?
Yeah, I think both of you really, and I always tell it to my students, how important it is to put, I always talk about, I don't care about my readers, not necessarily care that there are readers, but I am aware of craft tools that help, like you said, bring into the world a poem. And for both of you, teach me how important it is to put your readers' feet on the ground, right? So tell them where they are. So I know I'm in Chapel Hill, right? I know I'm in Durham. And me knowing that, I can picture the world around me and it helps me walk around a bit, right?
Absolutely.
Thank you for that, man. I love to hear the response of what this experience is like for you up there. So thank you for that. We have lots of questions. Should we get to some audience questions, or can maybe have you read one more poem before we get into the questions?
It's up to you all.
Is that too much pressure? Wait,
I want to hear.
all right, let's get right to the questions. I might put pressure on you before we end to do one more poem, but let's do some questions. Thank you so much. And I also want to remind folks that you can put questions in the question and answer box down at the bottom of our screen. So the first one is from Esther Glenn. This happened very early on that we got this question. It was for Tyree, but it's for anyone, I would just assume. I recently purchased the book Poet, The Remarkable Story of George Moses Horton by Don Tate. Have you read this book, and has the legacy of George Moses Horton influenced you?
I have not read that particular book. I've read the work, of course. Yeah, I mean, every time I'm at UNC, I'm thinking about that particular history, and me being, right, a teacher here and also with my own particular history. I'm constantly thinking about that. If I wrote novels, I would have started a novel about his life and my own working at UNC. It's not necessary. Well, he's actually in the poem that I read. There's a line of his in the first poem of this book. So I'm thinking about him constantly. That's the most that's shown up in the work yet. I'm sure it'll be more down the line.
Yeah, I think as the laureate here, like I think about him a lot. I think about how I can acknowledge him and his sort of legacy here. And also, I think the real question that stands out for me when I think about him and his life is just like, how did he survive the encounter of whiteness so present, right? I think he had to like not give a fuck at some point, because I know many students thought what he did was a sideshow thing, right? Some of it he would like drink and get drunk and sometimes and share these poems, right? Which doesn't come through in the children's book, right? But like, you know, thinking about how did you, and his work came about because white folks wanted it published, you know? And so how do you navigate being a Black artist in a white town where a lot of spaces I enter? I ran a nonprofit here, all white women in that arena. And like, how do you navigate like doing very important work that feels like it's feeding your soul while also navigating the world and being around people who sometimes have so much more wealth than you do and are inviting you in a space for pennies in comparison to what they have, and like asking you to do your thing and saying that they appreciate you so much and giving all this verbal praise, but then you go back into, you know, enslavement, or you go back to a plantation after that. And I felt that a lot in being a kid from the rural buffer, coming into UNC and working with students, running a nonprofit in this town, and then going back to my parents' house and being like, I really want to be able to like buy you a house on this. I really want to be able to buy a car. I really want to be able to pay for your brakes, or be, you know. And so I don't know. I'm like constantly trying in conversation and asking him questions on the astral plane about how do we do this? How do we make it through? You know. So yeah, I don't know. That's just a bit of my process, and also trying to honor him through whatever I do as a laureate.
I'll expand that question just to say this was to all poets. This is also from Esther. What do you carry with yourself of poets and writers from the past? And mentioning lots of names: Langston Hughes, James Weldon Johnson, Sonia Sanchez, Maya Angelou, James Baldwin, and others. So, Crystal, just about the legacy of previous writers in you. Where does that come emerge?
You know, and I think of George Moses, you know, obviously you always think about the resilience of slaves, right? And what they had to come through. I think it's so interesting that, you know, I think any of us can talk about when the poetry bug hit us and we knew that that was it, that was the calling, and we were just going to be poets, you know. We always had to think about the sacrifice of that, right? The sacrifice of being an artist and what that meant and how are we going to make this work, and because we knew we were going to do it. And the fact that he was a slave and how far he walked and how much time he put into it, you know, it is amazing to me. And that in itself is just, you know, and there's tons of stories like that, you know, from enslaved people. But, you know, I carry with me a lot of poets. I think, as Tyree knows, I carry Lucille Clifton with me because Lucille Clifton is one of the most amazing poets, and her story is the most amazing, you know, coming out of so much adversity. You know, she was violated. She suffered for many years from cancer. She had stair-step children, right? So it was one after the other after the other. I think she had five children, and they were all young at the same time. But she so much wanted to be a poet that she said, I'll write short poems. I'll be very concise because I don't have a lot of time, but I'm going to get these ideas down and I'm going to write them. And she did. And there's a story about, you know, once she published her first collection of poems, she was very excited, and she was walking down her street and stopped in the bookstore window, and her book was there. And she was so excited about it that she goes in and tries to talk to the bookstore lady. She says, that's my book. And the bookstore owner was white, female, and said, no, it's not. No, it's not. And she said, no, it is. And this is in a time where your face wasn't on the cover of it. You know, you wouldn't know that it was hers. But just in disbelief that she would actually, that a woman of color in that time period would actually have a collection of work. So her story to me is so moving, and it gets me up every day. And when I don't feel like writing, I think about Clifton.
Yes, yes.
I want to thank Paul also, who's been dropping in information on all these writers for our viewers out there. Just a comment that Lois Davis made, and as well as Mary Coleman. Mary Coleman was talking about Winston-Salem, and Lois was just thanking you, CJ, for your portrayal of the gentrification of Chapel Hill, saying it could be Winston-Salem, it could be anywhere. It certainly was Williamsburg, Brooklyn. It was everywhere that we've seen all over the country in all of these places. So thank you for that. Really, you know, biting critique in those. I have a question here from Lloyd Kramer, our director of Carolina Public Humanities. Thank you, Lloyd, for tuning in today. Lloyd asks, your poetry provides beautiful uses of language and vivid images of daily life, but does poetry also contribute to political identities and political movements? And what is your view of Amanda Gorman's recent Inauguration Day poem, The Hill We Climb?
Yeah. So one of my dear mentors, I'm blessed to spend some time with our state poet laureate Jackie Shelton Green, and have several conversations. And she draws a very important thing. I'll sort of start from the end of the question. Important thing is that, like, not taking anything away from Amanda Gorman, but we have our first, like, Native American adult poet laureate. Like, and there was no acknowledgement, there was nothing, no hat tip, none of that happened. And so I feel like it's very important that we not forget our elders. That's just, like, not how we as Black folks get down. Like, we don't forget our elders. We don't leave out people from the conversation. And so I appreciate all the attention and everything that Amanda Gorman is getting. And I think that we in America are obsessed with what's the new hot shit, you know, and in that we forget where we came from and what else has already been going on while we come in. So like, I think for me, I work very hard to become the poet. I've been doing poetry work here for about 10 years and like 15 years. And with that comes an understanding that I don't exist on my own. That for me to be up here on this platform saying what I have to say, that Jackie Shelton Green needs to exist. right? A Fred, a Fred Joyner needs to exist. Like all these other amazing artists and writers from this community have to also exist with me for me to be possible. And so, I think that, not taking anything away from Amanda Gorman as a youth poet laureate, but I think there are other people who have been doing this work a lot longer that need to also like be recognized as much as she's being recognized. That has been saying some of the things that she said. Like literally, Maya Angelou is quoted in the poem she read on Inauguration Day. And folks don't know that. Folks think they're quoting Amanda Gorman and they're actually quoting Maya Angelou. So yeah, my elders have brought that to my attention, and I think as a bridge person who's 30 something and in between the younger generation, I'm like, get to know your elders, right? It's not just you up there. So that's sort of my thought on that end part. I don't know that I answered the first part of the question, but
The first part of the question was about political identities and does poetry also contribute to political identities and political movements?
yeah, and of course it does. It does. Like I think the phrase Black Lives Matter is a poem in itself.
It is.
Right? It might be the shortest, like right next to it might be the second shortest poem after Muhammad Ali's Me We. Right?
Poetry's been a part of every
Right.
Black political movement and many political movements. So that's just a given. That yeah, I do think they missed a grave opportunity to not let Joy Horter, the new Native American poet laureate, speak. I thought that there was room for them to share that stage. I thought that they pinpointed and sort of highlighted Amanda because of the youth, the rising youth attention we're getting now with Black Lives Matter and the young woke white people. And so it was a good opportunity for a youth poet laureate to speak to the youth, but I think there was opportunity to share that stage.
It becomes an act of symbolism, but and symbols are very important. That we have this young poet up there to reach this audience, but symbols also shine so bright that they obscure this other things that we need to
Yeah.
see as well. And so social justice is a giant intersectional challenge for us. And so when you focus on the young and just particular, but at the same time, I'm glad poetry is in a public space, right?
Yeah,
So for sure.
and she did a wonderful job. I should
Yeah,
say.
yeah, for sure. That's it. But I think what the side effect of that is that all these states are now trying to create youth laureate programs, and they haven't really invested in their regular poet laureate programs. So it's like, all right, let's redirect the funds, have a youth poet laureate, and like all of a sudden, all these like people who've been doing this work for years and years, and on pennies are now like second to that. And not to say that I think we need to make a bigger table. Right, everybody should be able to sit. But yeah, it's not one or the other. I think that sometimes that public.
Well, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit to a question because it does come from thinking about the younger generation, right? And we've had a lot of people, by the way, and I will just point out, and I'll try to mention some of the others, asking, so Lois Davis, what would you encourage preteen and teen poets to write about? Christy Norris, the director of Carolina K-12, who I know you've worked with CJ, and Tyree is going to work with this summer, and Crystal, you will work with them too, as we certainly hope. Christy Norris asks, hi Christy out there, since we do have some K-12 teachers in the audience, do you have thoughts or advice on how teachers might use poetry to come at some of these issues, such as injustice and racism and resistance, with the understanding of the highly charged political bullying, i.e. only to teach American exceptionalism, as we discussed, they are facing in many of their classrooms? So I guess sort of two questions about how do we encourage the youth themselves, and what about teachers, and what can we do to bring this into the classroom?
I would encourage students to write about themselves.
Yep.
So
gonna
first
say.
ask them, what is your narrative, right? That's what I always have my students thinking about. And this is graduate level to elementary school. What is your narrative? And thinking about your narrative, what symbols and obsessions do you see showing up in your work? Right, so an obsession of me would be Youngsville, right, as a place. Be Chapel Hill, right? Would maybe be Durham. Also, for them to think about this idea of love, death, and desire. And so we're all constantly writing about this love, death, and desire. And it's the thing that connects us among human beings. So for them to look at that, right? So they're reading a poem. How is that poem using love, death, or desire, or all three? And how does that relate to your personal narrative, right? Have you had a similar situation that relates to love, death, or desire, right? That you could see yourself, that you could see in this poem. And that way we can all start to realize that though we put ourselves in these little tribes, that we have these things that connects us as humans. And that's always good and I think that just teaches empathy, right?
Thoughts on education, poetry?
Everything
Yeah.
Tyree just said.
Yep, it's personal and it's political. Poems are social. And so, yeah, students writing about themselves is definitely going to connect them to what's happening in the world. And the idea of reading it and analyzing it and critiquing it, sure, that's part of the curriculum, that's part of the lesson, right? But like you said, the best lesson is to have them insert themselves in a poem, because you're going to see all of these issues, political issues that come up. It's going to come up.
How would you then translate that to the teacher who
Yeah.
has a lot of things that they have to do? How do you get the teacher to say, this is important for me to use poetry?
So I was just thinking about that. Like, I think teachers have to come off of the soapbox, as it were, that they are the experts in the room. Like, I think no matter what grade you're in, that child, that student is an expert in their own experience.
Yep.
And to enter the classroom understanding that, like, you just entered a room with 10 to 23 to 30 experts in their own experience, right? With that lens, you understand that, like, actually your goal is not to have your students download some information, but then to actually provide a process that makes it easy for them to share the wisdom that they have with you. And I think poetry becomes a mechanism for doing that. It's like, and showing up to ask the questions that helps them figure out who they are, where they place themselves in the world, right? And also introducing these little ideas of whatever issues going on in the world, and how does that intersect with your own personal lived experience. And so I think for teachers, it's a lens shift to me. I experienced so many teachers who thought that they were, who had an understanding that I was there to just download the information they have. And in some cases, when we learning equations or we learning chemical balance things that you know about and I don't know about, you might feel that there is some knowledge that I don't have that you should share. But the goal is to get to have me understand how that intersects with my world at home. When I leave here and look at the leaf, like, I understand that, like, okay, photosynthesis is happening on this tree at my house. Not just like, this is the chemical algorithm for photosynthesis.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
That's
It's
so
not a lesson, it's an experience, right? Teaching poetry. It should not be a lesson.
So this is something that we face all the time in humanities. And Carolina Public Humanities, we're asked to defend the humanities in a world that's constantly cutting humanities programs, in a world that emphasizes STEM. We have to come up with these sort of instrumental arguments as to why the humanities matter. Let me ask, is there an instrumental argument about the skills that you learn from engaging in writing poetry? And you don't need to make this sales pitch to me, but just imagine saying to someone who says, well, what are they going to learn that's practical out of that?
For me, I wasn't the best student at all, and poetry gave me something to focus on. And when you read poetry, it points you into other directions. It makes you do research. So I want to write this poem about a particular bird. I have to go and do research on this bird. And that points you to another book, right? To another book. And so your knowledge starts growing. I've got other questions. I'm just going to talk. I wanted to say, I think what you said is so important about, if that's something I had in school. So when I was in that math class, learning those equations, that someone pointed out to me, like, hey, you can take this out into the real world and do this with it. This is what it looks like in the real world. And I think there is that disconnect. We think about this wall, right? You mentioned we think about this as, this information that we get, but then when we close it, I think that information is literally still happening around us in the world. And that's something that we've maybe cut off.
And I think that's why humanities is so important, is that it places us in an actual place, right? When we leave that classroom, right? Leave that space. So poetry is so important that, like, then all of a sudden we're paying attention to where right? We're paying attention to what people are saying and how people are saying it. I was a quiet kid in my family, and so like usually it's like grown folks talking, go out and play, or grown folks talking like close your mouth, don't say nothing. So I was a quiet kid, so I got to sit under the feet of my elders as a kid. I was the one kid who was in the room, and my dad would be like, "He's fine, he heard it all before." And because I could listen and be there, like poetry just came really natural for me in some ways, because I was seeing my world, and I think poetry is one entry point to do that.
Right.
Well, at the risk of inserting a popular cultural figure, I think, Brene Brown encourages us to really not push down our creativity, to embrace our creativity. And I think we do that so much as parents, as communities, as mentors, is to have children push down that creativity, right? And I think we are our best selves when we're allowed to be creative. If I didn't self-actualize, and I was working jobs, I was making money, I was doing everything I thought I needed to do to be a decent citizen and take care of my children and build this sort of financial future for myself, but I was not happy. And so you need to self-actualize. You need the humanities. You need to understand that this is a part of you, right? It's not just about technology and science and math and all of that. The humanities is a huge part, and creativity is a huge part of you. And I think it's necessary not only for your personal happiness, but I think you're a better person in the world when you embrace it.
And that's where it's at. That's why I think humanities is so important, because it makes our students better people.
Yeah.
I say that at the end of the semester, but at least gives them a lens to look at someone else, right, outside of their framework. And humanities is what it's about to be a human being. And I think, that's at the core. I think that's so important.
One thing that occurs to me as an educator, my students, I tell this to them all the time, especially after reading some pretty perfunctory papers, that have just been thrown out there. I say, writing is thinking. And if you're not thinking clearly, you're not writing clearly. So do you think poetry, by having to be thinking about the words that makes you a better thinker as well, right?
Yeah.
There's something to
Yeah,
that.
there feels like
I think poetry is critical thinking.
It's like the practice of thinking. Thinking critically about a cooler or an image or the floor. It is thinking critically, like what else is here?
And making those choices about how to accurately convey what it is you're trying to get across. And I think those are skills. I mean, here we have to sell these instrumental ideas, right? But these are skills that are applicable to anything, right? So if everybody gets a little bit of time with poetry and being intentional about the connection between what they write and how they think and what's worth conveying, would make them better at all sorts of things. And as you said, because it'll make a better society as well. Krista, you touched on something about employment and work and just living in this world and being a poet. And Corey Waters asks, have any of you found it most difficult wanting to speak truths on behalf of Black America or your community, but having to remain censored as a result of a daytime job, or because of having to be politically correct in recent periods of I'm not sure what that word is, but racial hostility? I mean, just the sense of, I don't sense that you folks feel that you can't speak your words, right? But what is that like for, are there other people whose voices are being changed by the circumstances, the structures that they're living in?
I guess we're on a UNC program, I should say. I think I've wrote river hymns before I got a job at UNC. Hopefully they read the book and they let me in here. So, I do think, and this is not being politically correct or anything, I do think I don't want to give away all the secrets. And I don't want to even explain what I mean by that. That's something I try to be hesitant about, not to give away everything.
Yeah, I mean, I think as poet laureate, I'm much more discerning about what I say, but it doesn't get filtered any different. My lens is still the same, but I think as a poet laureate, like it feels a little bigger than me, and so it's about saying what I have to say, and at the same time thinking about my community and how it impacts my people. But for me, who I am as a writer, like I wrote that Chapel Hill poem that I shared first today before I was a poet laureate, years before I was a poet laureate. And many people know me from rallies and all that sort of stuff from that poem. And so I'm pretty unapologetic in what I have to say and my criticality, and also understanding that if I love something, I have to be critical of it. Like, not all the time. You know, we can see the roses, you know, stop and smell or whatever. But at the same time, it's really important for me to be critical of those spaces, those places, those areas.
I'm going to read a few chat comments. They're not necessarily questions, just to say that people are listening and responding. Valerie Person says, "Thank you, poets. I so appreciate you emphasizing the importance of recognizing those who come before you. There seems to be such a movement to not value the elders in so many areas." So thank you for that, Valerie, that comment. Mary Coleman writes, "It's not just in poetry that our society is forgetting those who have been there before them. And also, all students can write poetry." I will say we have a lot of teachers in the audience, so they're listening for sure. Wilma Peebles writes, "Black poets matter," so that we appreciate that. Esther Glenn writes, "As a teacher, poetry is language arts and should be taught all the time. Poetry is also a part of every standardized test from grade school to graduate school." So that's good to know. And certainly, teachers, Mary Coleman also writes, "Teachers may not be experts in everything, especially poetry. However, we have to appear to be expert in our basic subjects or students will lose faith in us. So we have to balance our vulnerability of not knowing everything with being an expert." And I certainly know what that's like. I teach world history since 1945. It's impossible to know everything in the world since 1945. So
I love what you said, CJ, about I don't know if it was in a poem or not. You said I love you, but you got to do better. And I think that's such a true statement.
great. We have also, I just want to say, and I'll ask you for some information. Lois Davis wants to know, are the poets available for poetry readings in community settings, schools, etc., outside of the Orange and Durham County area? And the answer to that is yes. And you can all contact us here at Carolina Public Humanities. If you want to write me personally at email.unc.edu, I'll make sure that our poets get that information. And Paul is dropping great stuff in the chats there. I have a great question I'm going to ask in just a moment, but I want to get to a few of these other comments. Esther asked CJ, but I'm going to just open it up to all of you. When you submit your poetry, do you feel a certain loss in letting your poetry thrive outside your creative mind?
I don't know that I ever submit my poetry.
It's the wrong person to ask. We did the submitting.
I mean, well,
When you give your poetry out.
but yeah. And I apply, I've applied for some fellowships and things like that. And like, there is a part of me, like, I don't know, I think I still hold on to it. I think even whenever I publish work, and there are some forms in which people can get my work written down, I still feel like it's mine. Like it's not a loss. It's a piece of me that I'm sharing. That is like, that will grow back in a different way. It's like sharing a strand of my hair with somebody, right? It's like another follicle is gonna grow next week. We'll be good. I got a lot of it. And so it doesn't like, I don't feel like I feel a sense of loss. I feel like I gave a gift.
Yeah, poems are social, and for me, they're a conversation. And when I share my work with you, I want to have a conversation. So no, I don't feel like, I'm not going to, be egotistical and say my poems are a gift, but in some ways I do feel like, it is a gift. It's not, what am I going to do? Like you say, I own it. It is mine. So yeah, me sharing it, it's better.
Yeah, my poems don't stay the same. Even if they're in a book, I go back and I edit poems that are already published in the book. I've done that with all my books. And so my poems are constantly changing, so it's never, like I have copies, maybe old copies of Cardinal. It's a book that's marked through, right? Different ideas for poems. So they change. I don't ever feel like I'm giving it away. I don't necessarily feel like, because they change so much, I don't ever I feel attached to them, but they're constantly growing and changing. So
You know, I think one of the things we have to also appreciate about artists is that we should be proud of our work, right? And there's an element of saying, you know, we've given this up, and yes, we're giving it out as a matter of community, but we also will be recognized for that, you know, for the efforts that we've done. And of course, you know, if we spend all of our time thinking about the recognition we get, it'll affect our art. But I just want to point it out there. You should be proud of your work, and you know, and by sharing it, it elevates a sense of self-esteem, I would hope, because we certainly are all elevated by it. I'm going to ask, this is for all of you, are you sponsoring events for emerging poets to attend, or are there events you want to mention in the local area that you'll be speaking at? Or I know it's not a great time for events, but we're slowly opening up, and certainly there's a lot of availability if people are writing in as well. Anything on the radar for you?
I'm not doing much this summer. Summertime, it's my time to write. Yeah, I mean, I get asked to do events. It's not a public event. I might be doing something in July, in August. But yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I actually am coming off a very busy April and like March, April, May, and like yeah, the first half of this year has been really busy, and I'm appreciating the income, but the output is a learning curve right now after the pandemic period. So, yeah, there are a few things that I have coming up that I'm blanking on the names of, but that's just how much I'm oriented towards rest. Like I'm not even looking at my calendar. I know there are things on there, but
Can we find this information on your website?
For
Because we're putting all your websites. Anything coming up for you, Crystal?
Yeah, like Tyree, I teach as well, so summer's a higher writing time for me.
Great.
And so I'll be writing mostly. I do have a reading coming up, I think, in August, but that's pretty far off. So.
You ready for the question from left field?
Oh yeah.
Okay, Lauren Bullock asked, if someone were to summon you, think seance, but alive, what 5 items would they put in the circle?
Goodness.
How about, I'll put it as 3. How about 3 for time's sake? I've never had a question like that before. Thank you,
Wow.
Lauren.
I would want the soil from my Aunt Margaret's garden in Youngsville. I would want maybe a piece of headstone from my grandmother's grave. I would want a picture of my Uncle Boo Boo. I would want maybe a bird of some time. Maybe a cardinal would be nice. Some type of food, or maybe just coals burning. Kingsford.
nice.
And maybe that's it.
You're going to have to go because I'm still thinking about that.
I've never had a question like this, so.
That's quite a question. I'd say my grandma's church had a Luther Vandross CD. A like composition book, and a pack of like gummy worms. Yeah.
I can sense you're emanating out of the table just from that. Seance is a little grim.
That's a wild
Anything?
question.
When my mother passed away, she was remarried to someone else, and so they had marital property, so I only got to take a small amount of things. And I have a little hat box, and in that hat box are things that she gave me, like for graduation, she gave me a mug, just small things. She had a mother's ring with all 3 stones of her children, so I would need that there. I would need a Stevie Wonder CD.
Oh, which one?
Oh goodness, there's so many. I think this is Down to Earth is one of his first albums. So that one, Songs in the Key of Life, something like that. That, and I would want a collection of Lucille Clifton's poems to have with me, and of course I need a composition book. So.
Fantastic.
I
Thank
need
you.
to add some music. I want to say Nina Simone for mine.
Oh, sure.
Maybe live at Newport. That's so amazing.
Oh yeah, it's a good one.
Well, thank you. It's a fun question. It certainly is a fun question. And could you indulge us with one more poem apiece? Maybe we'll just go in the order: Tyree, Crystal, and CJ. And first of all, before we end with poetry, I want to thank our poets, Tyree Daye, Crystal Simone Smith, CJ Suitt. This has just been absolutely a beautiful morning hearing these poems, and a powerful morning. I've just been welling up with emotions over here, and I know our participants out there have been along for this really wonderful ride as well. So thank you, all three of you, and we look forward to hearing your poems.
Nice, thank you. From which I flew. Only together, holding their hands in silence, can I see what a field has done to my mother, aunts, and uncles. The land around my grandmother's old tin roof has changed. I doubt she recognized it from above. How many blackbirds does it take to lift a house? I'll bring my living, you wake your dead. We have nowhere to go, but we're leaving anyhow, by many ways. When they ask why you want to fly, blackbird, say, I want to leave the South because it killed the first man I loved, and so much more killing. Say my son's name. His death was the first thing to break me in and fly me through town. If grief has a body, it wears his Dodgers cap and still walks to the corner store for lottery tickets and Budweiser 40s. I don't like what I have to be here to be. All the blackbirds with nowhere to go keep leaving.
Uncloudy day. At the 10th year's dark mark, the clouds are as white as bones, and the sky is the sky where the ocean stands after the last splattering of night, a horizon so convincing even the cynic can glimpse the other side. For so long I resented the swallowing earth, held every pinch of darkness, a coworker's harmless but sharp remark, exhume a body after a year and it's basically human soup. My mother stood stove-side once, her eyes filled with a clumsy glee as she spoke of fourth Sundays. Her mother fried chicken after church. The preacher might come. All other days they ate beans and ham hocks. She gave it a name, Uncloudy Day, a day that is just so. You are unbroken by memories where you stand, gazing at the sky, unfisted and glad.
3. Intergalactic. The universe calls me home, calls my heart nebula. Vocal cords bellowing galaxies, these poems are prayers to an abundant deity who knows they are me, realizing themselves, deep space and shallow skin, interstellar intelligence coursing through every vein.
Thank you so much, all three of you, for these incredible poems, incredible thoughts on what it is to write poetry. I want to thank all of you for joining us today. I want to remind you folks that we need all the support we can get if you would like to donate to Carolina Public Humanities to get some of these poets in front of our teachers and to help us do that incredible work we do with Carolina K through 12 throughout the state. Paul will be dropping information on giving to Carolina Public Humanities again. Our registration for fall events is opening. One event in particular that might be of interest for you would be our Juneteenth event coming up with Pat Parker speaking on Ella Baker and Claude Clegg speaking on Barack Obama. We also have, of course, have our full roster weekend seminars available, everything from Plato to Conceptions of Time. And of course, we have a really wonderful music series that'll be starting out on June 3rd and on June 10th. June 3rd, we'll be doing Caribbean Connections, looking at Latin jazz, and we'll be looking at the work of Chopin on June 10th. So check that out. Please go. We've dropped a lot of links in the chats. Feel free to write us at human@unc.edu, or me personally, or owre@email.unc.edu, and we'll be happy to forward you any contact information on any of that. Thank you for joining us. One more time, let's thank our wonderful poets, Tyree Daye, Crystal Simone Smith, and CJ Suitt. You have a wonderful day out there, and we'll see you next time. Thank you all. Bye-bye.